The pregnancy test showed 2 pink lines, but my husband David was too busy texting someone to notice my tears of joy. Those tears would turn bitter just 3 weeks later when I discovered exactly who had been occupying his attention. What started as the happiest moment of my life became the catalyst for a journey that would take me from sleeping in my car while 7 months pregnant to making the phone call that would destroy the man who abandoned us both. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sickness had finally subsided, replaced by the gentle flutter of kicks that reminded me daily of the miracle growing inside me. At 24 weeks pregnant, I felt more connected to my unborn daughter than I'd ever felt to anyone, including David. That should have been my first warning sign, but love has a way of making us blind to the obvious. David Harper had always been charming, the kind of man who could sell ice to penguins and make them grateful for the transaction. His construction and development company had grown from a 2-man operation to one of Portland's most sought-after residential builders. We'd met at a coffee shop in downtown Beaverton where I was sketching logo concepts for a client. He'd approached with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted, complimenting my artistic talent before smoothly transitioning into asking me out. Our 3-year marriage had been comfortable, predictable even. David provided well, I supported his ambitions, and we'd settled into the suburban dream house he'd built for us in Beaverton. The white picket fence, manicured lawn, and 2-car garage painted the picture of success that David craved. When we'd decided to start a family, it felt like the natural next chapter in our carefully orchestrated life, but comfort, I was learning, could be deceiving. The first crack in my perfect world appeared on a Tuesday evening in late October. David had been working increasingly late, claiming that a major downtown development project required his constant attention. His phone had become an extension of his hand, buzzing with messages at all hours. When I'd playfully tried to see who was texting during dinner, he'd pulled the device away with an irritation that seemed disproportionate to my innocent curiosity. That night, David's phone rang at 11:30. I was already in bed, one hand resting on my growing belly, when I heard him answer in hushed tones before quickly moving to his home office. The conversation lasted nearly an hour, his voice a low murmur that carried through the thin walls but remained indecipherable. When he finally returned to bed, he claimed it was Marcus Webb, his business partner, dealing with a permit emergency. The excuse might have satisfied me if not for what happened the following morning. David had rushed out early, forgetting his coffee mug on the kitchen counter. When I went to wash it, I discovered a receipt tucked underneath. Dinner for 2 at Kennard, one of Portland's most expensive restaurants, dated the same evening he'd claimed to be buried in paperwork at the office. The total suggested champagne and multiple courses. Hardly the working dinner he'd described. My hands trembled as I studied the receipt, my pregnant mind racing through possible explanations. Maybe he'd entertained a client. Maybe Marcus had joined him for a celebration dinner after resolving whatever crisis had kept them late. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation that didn't involve the growing knot of dread in my stomach. But deep down, I already knew. The second revelation came 3 days later, when David's dry cleaning was delivered while he was out. The delivery man handed me a garment bag containing David's favorite navy suit, the one he'd worn to our wedding anniversary dinner just 2 months earlier. As I hung it in his closet, a lipstick tube fell from the jacket pocket. The shade was a deep crimson called Seduction, nothing like the subtle pinks and nudes I prefer. I sat on our bed, holding the lipstick like evidence in a crime I didn't want to solve, feeling our daughter kick as if sensing my distress. Every innocent explanation I tried to construct crumbled under scrutiny. David wasn't the type to carry makeup for clients, and his mother lived in Seattle, making it unlikely the lipstick belonged to family. That evening, I attempted to broach the subject delicately. David was reviewing blueprints in his office, when I knocked softly on the doorframe. "Can we talk?" I asked, settling carefully into the leather chair across from his desk, my hand unconsciously smoothing over my belly. He looked up with barely concealed impatience. "What's on your mind, Nat? I've got to finish reviewing these plans tonight." I placed the lipstick on his desk between us. "This fell out of your suit pocket." For just a moment, something flickered across his face. Surprise, guilt, Calculation. Then his expression smoothed into confused innocence. I have no idea where that came from, he said, barely glancing at the evidence. Maybe the dry cleaner mixed up the orders. The lie came so easily, so smoothly, that I almost believed him. Almost. The receipt from Kennard was interesting too, I continued, watching his face carefully. Tuesday night, when you said you were working late with Marcus. This time the pause was longer. David set down his pen and leaned back in his chair, studying me with the same calculating expression he used when negotiating contracts. I did work late, he said finally. Marcus and I grabbed dinner afterward to discuss the Henderson project. Is there a problem with that? You said you were too busy to come home for the dinner I made. Things ran longer than expected. His tone had grown cooler, more distant. I didn't realize I needed to provide you with a detailed itinerary of my business activity. The conversation felt like walking through quicksand. Every question I asked seemed to pull me deeper into doubt about my own perceptions. David had always been skilled at making others question themselves, a talent that served him well in business but left me feeling unsteady in my own home. That night, I lay awake listening to David's steady breathing beside me, one hand on my belly, where our daughter was practicing what felt like soccer kicks. I tried to convince myself that pregnancy hormones were making me paranoid, that successful men like David naturally attracted attention, that lipstick and dinner receipts were circumstantial at best, but sleep eluded me. The final piece of my carefully constructed denial shattered the following Saturday. David had left early for what he claimed was a site inspection, kissing my forehead with the same casual affection he might show a sister. I'd planned a quiet day of nursery preparation, sorting through the baby clothes my friend Claire had brought over the previous week. Around noon, my phone rang. Claire's name appeared on the screen, but her voice carried an odd tension I'd never heard before. Natalie, she began carefully, I'm at the farmer's market downtown, and I thought I should call you. Is everything okay? I asked, setting down the tiny onesie I'd been folding. I just saw David. She paused, choosing her words deliberately. He's here with a woman, a redhead. Their clothes. The onesie slipped from my numb fingers. Clothes how? Holding hands, he has his arm around her. They're looking at engagement rings at the jewelry booth. The world tilted sideways. I gripped the nursery chair for support, my free hand instinctively protecting my belly. Are you sure it's David? I whispered, though I knew Claire would never make such a call without certainty. I'm positive, Nat. I'm so sorry, they're acting like a couple. A very happy couple. I hung up without another word, and sank into the rocking chair David had assembled just weeks earlier, when we'd still been excited about becoming parents together. The chair creaked gently as I rocked, trying to process what felt impossible to accept. Engagement ring. While I was 6 months pregnant with his child, David was shopping for engagement rings with another woman. The rational part of my mind insisted there had to be an explanation. Maybe he was helping a friend shop for his girlfriend. Maybe the woman was a client who needed assistance with a personal purchase. Maybe Claire had misinterpreted innocent interactions. But my heart knew better. I spent the afternoon in a strange state of suspended animation, going through the motions of normal Saturday activities while my world crumbled around me. I folded baby clothes, organized the changing table supplies, and started a load of laundry, all while feeling like I was watching someone else's life from outside my own body. David returned home, around 6, carrying takeout from our favorite Thai restaurant, and acting with the same casual affection he'd shown for months. He kissed my cheek, asked about my day, and commented on how organized the nursery was looking. If I hadn't received Claire's call, nothing would have seemed unusual about his behavior, but I had received the call. How was the site inspection? I asked, as we unpacked the food, studying his face for any sign of deception. Productive, he replied without missing a beat. The Henderson project is coming along nicely. We should be able to break ground on the second phase ahead of schedule. He launched into details about permits and subcontractors, speaking with the easy confidence of someone telling the truth. If I hadn't known better, I would have believed every word. After dinner, David retreated to his office while I cleaned the kitchen with mechanical precision. Every plate I washed, every surface I wiped, felt like preparing for something I couldn't yet name. My daughter kicked persistently, as if sensing the tension that had settled over our home like a storm cloud. That night, as David slept beside me, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to find out who she was. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Monday morning, David received a call that sent him into overdrive. A permit issue with the Henderson project required his immediate attention, and he'd need to spend the day downtown resolving bureaucratic complications. He left the house in a rush, forgetting to clear his browsing history on the tablet we shared. With trembling fingers, I opened the device and began scrolling through his recent activity. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. Restaurant reservations for 2, hotel bookings for romantic getaways I'd never taken, search histories for jewelry stores and vacation destinations. And then, buried among the evidence of deception, I found her social media profile. Vanessa Cole, 28 years old, stunning in the way that came from professional styling and expensive maintenance. Her photos showed a lifestyle of luxury dining, exotic travel, and designer everything. Her relationship status was listed as complicated, and her recent posts included pictures from locations I recognized from David's recent business trips. But it was the photo from the previous Saturday that destroyed me completely. David and Vanessa at the farmer's market, her hand extended to show off a diamond ring that caught the sunlight like a promise. The caption read, "When you know, can't wait to start our new chapter." I stared at the image until it burned into my memory, my hands shaking so violently I nearly dropped the tablet. My husband of 3 years, the father of my unborn child, had proposed to another woman while I was home preparing our baby's nursery. The betrayal cut so deep I couldn't breathe. Not just David's infidelity, but the calculated nature of it. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment, or a midlife crisis. This was a deliberate, methodical replacement of one life with another. I spent the rest of the day in a fog of disbelief, mechanically going through the motions of normal life while processing the magnitude of David's deception. When he returned home that evening, carrying flowers and wearing the same smile he'd shown me for 3 years, I felt like I was looking at a stranger. "For my beautiful wife," he said, kissing my forehead as he handed me the bouquet. "How was your—" I accepted the flowers with numb fingers, noting they were the same type Vanessa had posted about receiving the previous week. Even his gestures of affection were recycled from his other relationship. "Fine," I managed, my voice sounding foreign to my own ear. That night, I confronted him with the evidence. I showed him the photos, the reservations, the engagement announcement. I watched his face cycle through surprise, denial, anger, and finally, cold calculation. "It's not what you think," he began, but I cut him off. "She's wearing an engagement ring, David. Your engagement ring." He was quiet for a long moment, studying me with the same expression he used when evaluating property investments. When he finally spoke, his words shattered what remained of my heart. "I was going to wait until after the baby was born to tell you," he said with clinical detachment. "Vanessa and I are in love. We want to build a life together. I'll support the child, of course, but I can't pretend to be happy in a marriage that isn't working anymore." The casual cruelty of his words left me speechless. He spoke about our family like a business transaction gone wrong, something to be dissolved with minimal emotional investment. "Our marriage isn't working," I whispered, one hand protectively covering my belly. "Be honest now. We've been going through the motions for months. We want different things." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Vanessa understands my ambitions in ways you never have. I'm pregnant with your child, and I'll take care of my responsibilities," he replied, as if our daughter was merely an obligation to be managed. "But I won't pretend to love someone I don't anymore." The conversation that followed was a blur of logistics and accusations. David wanted me to move out, so Vanessa could move in. He'd provide minimal financial support, but expected me to be reasonable about the divorce proceedings. He spoke about our 3-year marriage and upcoming child like they were inconvenient complications to his real life with Vanessa. The man I'd loved, the father of my child, had vanished completely, replaced by someone who viewed my pregnancy as nothing more than an expensive mistake. By morning, everything I thought I knew about my life had crumbled. David left early, claiming another permit emergency, but I knew he was running to Vanessa. I sat in our kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of a life I'd believed was real, feeling my daughter move inside me as if reminding me that whatever David had destroyed, something precious remained. That's when I realized the hardest truth of all. I had nowhere to go. My family lived across the country. My savings were minimal, and David controlled all our joint assets. In a few short hours, I'd gone from secure suburban wife to homeless pregnant woman with no clear path forward. But sometimes rock bottom becomes the foundation for something stronger than what came before. I just didn't know it yet. The eviction notice arrived 3 days after David moved out, delivered by a sheriff's deputy who looked genuinely sympathetic when he saw my pregnant silhouette in the doorway. David had stopped paying the mortgage 2 months ago, something I discovered only when the bank's final notice explained that foreclosure proceedings would begin immediately. The house I'd considered mine, the nursery I'd so carefully prepared, the life I'd built was all disappearing faster than I could process. Standing in the empty living room where David's belongings used to be, I felt my daughter kick urgently, as if she too sensed the instability surrounding us. The walls that had once felt protective now seemed to mock me with their fresh paint and carefully chosen decorations. Every room held memories of a marriage I now realized had been crumbling long before I'd discovered the truth. My friend Claire arrived within an hour of my panicked phone call, her face pale with worry as she surveyed the chaos of my rapidly changing circumstances. She found me sitting on the kitchen floor, surrounded by legal documents I couldn't afford to fight, and pregnancy pamphlets that now felt like cruel jokes. "You can stay with me," she offered immediately, kneeling beside me with the careful movements of someone approaching a wounded animal. The couch pulls out into a bed. It's not much, but it's something. I wanted to accept her generosity, but Claire lived in a studio apartment, barely large enough for one person, let alone a pregnant woman and soon a crying baby. Her kindness was genuine, but her resources were as limited as mine had become. "I can't ask you to do that," I said, though every fiber of my being wanted to say yes. "You're already struggling to make ends meet." "Don't be ridiculous, Nat. We'll figure something out." But I could see the worry in her eyes, the calculation of someone trying to make impossible mathematics work. Claire bartended at a downtown restaurant, living paycheck to paycheck in Portland's increasingly expensive housing market. Adding a pregnant woman and newborn to her already tight budget would strain her beyond breaking. That night, I packed everything I could fit into my small Honda Civic, leaving behind furniture, dishes, and dreams that no longer belonged to me. The nursery was the hardest to abandon. I'd spent months choosing the perfect crib, painting walls a soft yellow that would work for any gender, collecting tiny clothes that now felt like artifacts from someone else's life. I took only what was essential: clothes for the changing seasons of pregnancy, important documents, the small savings account David hadn't discovered, and a photo of the ultrasound where my daughter's profile showed clearly for the first time. Everything else would have to be forgotten. The first night in my car was the longest of my life. I'd parked at a 24-hour grocery store, reasoning that the constant foot traffic would provide some safety. The front seat reclined partially, but my growing belly made comfortable sleep impossible. Every position sent shooting pains through my back, and my daughter seemed to respond to my stress with increased movement that kept me awake. Around 3 in the morning, a security guard tapped on my window. His flashlight beam was gentle, and his voice carried kindness rather than authority when I rolled down the window. "Ma'am, you can't sleep here overnight," he explained, his eyes taking in my obvious pregnancy and the belongings packed around me. "Store policy. But there's a rest stop about 5 miles east on Highway 26 that's safer for someone in your situation." I thanked him and drove to the rest stop, where I discovered I wasn't alone. 3 other cars held people who, like me, had nowhere else to go. A middle-aged man slept in his truck cab, a woman about my age curled up in her back seat, and an elderly couple dozed fitfully in an aging sedan. We were a community of the displaced, bound together by circumstances none of us had chosen. The rest stop had clean bathrooms and vending machines, luxuries I was learning not to take for granted. I bought crackers and water, rationing my limited cash while calculating how long my savings would last if I continued living this way. The math was depressing. At best, I had 6 weeks before complete destitution. Morning brought the reality of my new existence into sharp focus. My back ached from sleeping contorted in the driver's seat, my ankles had swollen from lack of movement, and my daughter's kicks felt more urgent, as if she too was protesting our accommodation. I used the rest stop bathroom to wash my face and brush my teeth, catching my reflection in the harsh fluorescent lighting. The woman staring back at me looked haggard, desperate, nothing like the confident graphic designer who'd had a home and husband just days early. Dark circles shadowed my eyes, my hair hung limp and unwashed, and my maternity clothes were already showing signs of wear from being slept in. I needed work, but finding employment while 7 months pregnant and homeless presented challenges I'd never imagined. My laptop had been one of the few valuable items I'd managed to pack, and I spent the morning at a coffee shop with free Wi-Fi, applying for every remote graphic design position I could find. The applications felt futile. Most required references from previous employers, a stable address for equipment delivery, and the ability to attend video conferences from a professional-looking environment. None of these requirements aligned with my current reality of living in a Honda Civic. After 3 hours and 2 cups of coffee stretched to justify my table space, I received an email from my former employer, Sandra Martinez, the owner of the small marketing firm where I'd worked before my pregnancy, had heard about my situation through Portland's tight creative community. Her message was brief but life-changing. Heard you might need work, have a project that could use your skills, call me. I called from the coffee shop's parking lot, my hands shaking as Sandra's familiar voice answered. She didn't ask intrusive questions about my circumstances or express pity about my situation. Instead, she offered practical help disguised as business necessity. I've got a client who needs a complete brand identity package, she explained. Logo, business cards, website design, the whole package. It's a rush job, and they're willing to pay premium rates for quick turnaround. Interested? Absolutely, I replied, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. What's the timeline? 2 weeks. The catch is they need to meet with the designer in person for initial consultation and final presentation. Can you handle that? I assured her I could, though I had no idea how I'd manage professional meetings while homeless. Sandra agreed to email the project details and contact information, along with an advance payment that would help me survive the next few weeks. The client was Ryan Mitchell, a lawyer starting his own practice after leaving a large Denver firm. He'd moved to Portland to be closer to family, and needed branding that reflected both his legal expertise and his commitment to helping ordinary people navigate complex legal situations. Our initial phone conversation revealed someone thoughtful and genuinely interested in understanding his client's needs. I don't want the typical stuffy law firm image, Ryan explained, his voice carrying a warmth that came through even over the phone. I want people to feel comfortable walking through my door, whether they're dealing with divorce, business formation, or immigration issue. I arranged to meet him the following Tuesday at a downtown coffee shop, giving myself time to prepare for what might be my only chance to secure stable income. Using my remaining savings, I bought a professional maternity dress and spent the night before the meeting in a truck stop bathroom washing my hair in the sink, and doing my best to look like someone worth hiring. Ryan Mitchell was younger than I'd expected, probably early 30s, with kind eyes and an easy smile that immediately put me at ease. He'd chosen a corner table away from the coffee shop's main traffic, and when I approached, he stood immediately, extending his hand with genuine warmth. Natalie Harper, I'm Ryan. Thank you for meeting me on such short notice. I shook his hand, noting the firm grip and direct eye contact that suggested confidence without arrogance. He waited until I was seated before sitting down himself, a small courtesy that felt significant after weeks of David's increasing disregard for basic respect. Sandra speaks very highly of your work, he continued, pulling out a folder of examples from other branding projects. I looked at your portfolio online. Your designs have a clarity and warmth that's exactly what I'm hoping to achieve. We spent 2 hours discussing his vision for the practice, his target clientele, and the message he wanted his brand to convey. Ryan was articulate about his goals but genuinely interested in my professional input, asking thoughtful questions about design choices and trusting my expertise in ways that reminded me I had valuable skills, despite my current circumstance. I should mention, he said, as our meeting was winding down, I'm planning to expand the practice fairly quickly. If this project goes well, there might be opportunities for ongoing work, website updates, marketing materials, that sort of thing. The possibility of steady income felt like a lifeline thrown to someone drowning. I assured him I'd be very interested in a longer-term working relationship, carefully avoiding any mention of my housing situation or personal circumstance. After Ryan left, I remained in the coffee shop, sketching initial logo concepts and feeling something I hadn't experienced in weeks: hope. For the first time since discovering David's betrayal, I was focusing on something other than survival. The creative process that had always been my refuge was asserting itself despite everything that had gone wrong. That night, parked at a different rest stop to avoid wearing out my welcome, I worked on Ryan's branding project using my laptop's battery and the dome light. My daughter was particularly active, her movements strong enough to distort my shirt, and I found myself talking to her as I worked. "We're going to be okay," I whispered, one hand on my belly while the other sketched variations of Ryan's logo. "Mama's going to figure this out. We're going to build something good together." The words felt like a promise I wasn't sure I could keep, but saying them aloud made them feel more possible. Over the next week, I developed 3 complete branding concepts for Ryan's practice, each reflecting a different aspect of his vision. The first emphasized his legal expertise with clean lines and traditional colors. The second highlighted his community focus with warmer tones and more approachable typography. The third balanced both elements, creating something professional yet welcoming. I presented the concepts at our second meeting, held in the conference room of a hotel where Ryan was staying while apartment hunting. Seeing the designs printed on high-quality paper and professionally mounted felt surreal after creating them while living in my car. Ryan studied each option carefully, asking intelligent questions about design choices and target audience appeal. "This one," he said finally, pointing to the balanced concept. "It's exactly what I was hoping for but couldn't articulate. Professional enough for corporate clients, approachable enough for individuals going through difficult times." His enthusiasm was genuine, and when he handed me the final payment, the amount was more than we'd originally discussed. When I questioned the discrepancy, Ryan smiled. "The quality exceeded my expectations," he explained. "Consider it a bonus for exceptional work and fast turnaround." The extra money meant I could afford a cheap motel room for several nights, the first real bed I'd slept in since leaving the house. The relief of stretching out fully, of having a private bathroom and the ability to shower properly was overwhelming. I found myself crying from exhaustion and gratitude, my daughter responding to my emotional release with gentle movements that felt reassuring rather than urgent. But even with the motel respite, I knew my situation remained precarious. The branding project had bought me time, but I needed sustainable income and permanent housing before my daughter arrived. Portland's rental market was notoriously difficult, with most landlords requiring first month's rent, last month's rent, and a security deposit that together exceeded my entire savings. It was during this period of uncertainty that Ryan called with an unexpected offer. His law practice was growing faster than anticipated, and he needed help with administrative tasks, client communications, and project management. The position wasn't full-time, but it offered steady income and the possibility of remote work when necessary. "I know it's not exactly graphic design," he explained during our phone conversation, "but you demonstrated excellent organizational skills during our project, and I'd rather work with someone I trust than start over with a stranger." I accepted immediately, though I still hadn't revealed my housing situation. Ryan assumed I had a stable home office, and I saw no reason to correct that assumption until I could make it reality. Working for Ryan's practice introduced me to the legal world in ways I'd never expected. I learned about business formation, contract law, and the intricacies of helping people navigate life's complications through legal means. Ryan was a patient teacher, explaining concepts clearly and trusting me with increasingly important responsibility. More importantly, working with him reminded me that I was capable, intelligent, and valuable beyond my role as David's wife or my daughter's mother. For hours each day I was simply Natalie Harper, skilled professional, contributing meaningfully to something worthwhile. My daughter seemed to approve of this new direction. Her movements became less frantic, more rhythmic, as if she too was settling into our new routine. During quiet moments between tasks, I would rest my hand on my belly and feel her respond to my touch, a private conversation between mother and child about the future we were building together. The turning point came when Ryan's practice landed its first major corporate client, a sustainable energy company that needed comprehensive legal support for their expansion into Oregon. The workload increased dramatically, and Ryan approached me about transitioning to full-time employment with benefits including health insurance. "I know it's a big change from graphic design," he said during our meeting in his newly rented office space, "but you've become indispensable to this practice. I can't imagine running it without you." The offer included a salary that would allow me to afford housing, health insurance that would cover my pregnancy and delivery, and the stability I desperately needed for my daughter's arrival. But accepting meant revealing the truth about my circumstances, something I'd been carefully avoiding. "There's something I need to tell you," I began, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, "about my current living situation." Ryan listened without judgment as I explained about David's betrayal, the foreclosure, and the weeks I'd spent living in my car. His expression shifted from surprise to concern to something that looked like admiration. "You've been working at this level while dealing with all of that?" he asked quietly. "Natalie, that's extraordinary." His response wasn't pity or charity, but genuine respect for what I'd accomplished under impossible circumstances. "For the first time in months, someone saw my strength rather than my vulnerability. The job offer stands," he continued firmly. "In fact, it makes me even more certain I want you as my business partner, not just my employee. Someone who can produce excellent work while navigating personal crisis is exactly the kind of person I want building this practice with me." That afternoon, I used my advance payment to secure a small apartment in Southeast Portland, nothing fancy but clean, safe, and mine. As I signed the lease with hands that shook from relief rather than fear, I felt my daughter move as if she too understood that we'd found our way to solid ground. The apartment was a studio with a separate kitchen nook and a bathroom that was entirely my own. After weeks of uncertainty, having a door that locked and a bed that was mine felt like the greatest luxury imaginable. My marriage had ended, my former life had disappeared, but something new was beginning. My daughter continued her gentle movements, as if acknowledging that we'd completed the first phase of our journey together. The woman who'd discovered her husband's betrayal while 7 months pregnant was evolving into someone stronger, more self-reliant, and more determined than she'd ever been. The worst was behind us, but the best was yet to come. My daughter Emma arrived on a snowy February morning, 3 weeks before her due date, and with an urgency that surprised everyone, including the medical staff. The labor was swift and intense, lasting only 6 hours from the first contraction to the moment Dr. Sarah Chen placed my screaming, perfect daughter on my chest. In that instant, surrounded by the sterile brightness of the delivery room, I felt a completion I'd never experienced before. Emma had David's dark hair, but my green eyes, and when she looked at me for the first time, I saw no trace of the man who'd abandoned us both. She was entirely herself, entirely mine, and entirely worth every sacrifice I'd made to bring us to this moment. Holding her tiny, warm body against mine, I whispered promises about the life we'd build together, just the two of us against whatever came next. Ryan had been my emergency contact, something that felt both practical and profoundly sad when the nurses asked about family notification. He arrived at the hospital within an hour of Emma's birth, carrying flowers and wearing the same gentle smile that had put me at ease during our first business meeting, nearly 4 months earlier. "She's beautiful, Natalie," he said softly, studying Emma's sleeping face through the nursery window. "Absolutely beautiful." There was something in his voice, a tenderness that went beyond professional courtesy or friendship, but I was too exhausted and overwhelmed to analyze it. Emma was barely 12 hours old, and I was already struggling to imagine how I'd manage single motherhood while working full-time. The next few weeks blurred together in a haze of sleepless nights, feeding schedules, and the steep learning curve of caring for a newborn while my body recovered from childbirth. Emma was a good baby, but even good babies require constant attention, and I quickly discovered that working from home with an infant was exponentially more challenging than I'd anticipated. Ryan was incredibly understanding about my adjusted schedule and distracted performance during our phone meetings. When Emma's cries interrupted conference calls, he'd simply wait patiently until I could calm her down and resume our conversation. His flexibility was a kindness I couldn't have expected from any employer, let alone one I'd known for such a short time. The first major test of our working relationship came when the sustainable energy client needed urgent documentation for a federal compliance deadline. The project required 12 hours of intensive research and document preparation, work that normally would have been straightforward but became nearly impossible with a 6-week-old baby demanding attention every 2 hours. I was struggling through the third revision of a complex contract summary when Emma began crying inconsolably, the kind of sustained wailing that suggested discomfort beyond simple hunger or fatigue. I'd been awake for nearly 20 hours straight. My eyes burned from staring at legal documents, and the deadline was approaching with terrifying speed. In desperation, I called Ryan to explain that I might not be able to complete the work on time. Instead of frustration or disappointment, his response was immediate and practical. "I'm coming over," he said simply. "You handle Emma. I'll handle the document." Within an hour, Ryan was sitting at my small kitchen table, laptop open and papers spread around him like he'd worked there for years. He'd brought coffee, sandwiches, and an ease with the chaos of my life that surprised me. When Emma finally settled down and fell asleep in my arms, I found him quietly organizing the materials I'd been struggling with all day. "You're about 60% finished," he observed, looking up from the documents. "The research is excellent. Let me handle the formatting and final review." We worked in comfortable silence for the next several hours, Emma sleeping peacefully in her bouncer beside us while Ryan transformed my scattered notes into polished legal documentation. Occasionally he'd ask for clarification on a research point or suggest alternative phrasing, but mostly he simply completed what I'd started with an efficiency that spoke to both his legal expertise and his understanding of my work style. "You don't have to do this," I said quietly as he printed the final versions near midnight. "Yes, I do," he replied, meeting my eyes with a directness that made my breath catch. "We're partners, Natalie. Partners help each other." The word hung in the air between us, loaded with implications neither of us was ready to address directly. But something had shifted during those hours of working together in my small apartment, something that went beyond professional collaboration into territory that felt both thrilling and terrifying. The sustainable energy project was completed successfully, leading to additional contracts and a growing reputation for Ryan's practice. Within 2 months of Emma's birth, we were handling more cases than Ryan could manage alone, and he approached me about expanding my role from administrative assistant to paralegal and eventually to full business partner. "I want to formalize our arrangement," he explained during a lunch meeting at a quiet cafe near his office. Emma slept peacefully in her carrier beside our table, occasionally making the soft sounds that never failed to make both of us smile. "You've become integral to every aspect of this practice. I think it's time we acknowledged that officially." The proposition was generous to the point of seeming impossible. Ryan was offering me a path to legal partnership, complete with profit sharing and decision-making authority, based on 4 months of work and potential he saw in me that I was still learning to recognize in myself. "I don't have a law degree," I pointed out, though my heart was already racing with the possibilities his offer represented. "You don't need one for everything we're doing," he countered. "You can handle client relations, case preparation, business development, financial management. I need someone I trust completely, and that's you." The trust he placed in me was both humbling and empowering. After months of David treating me like an afterthought in my own life, Ryan's confidence in my abilities felt revolutionary. But more than that, his offer represented something I'd never imagined possible, the chance to build something meaningful with someone who valued my contributions equally. I accepted his partnership offer that afternoon, signing documents that made our collaboration official while Emma gurgled contentedly in her carrier. For the first time since discovering David's betrayal, I felt like I was moving towards something rather than simply away from something else. The transition from employee to partner brought new challenges and responsibilities that stretched my capabilities in unexpected ways. I enrolled in paralegal certification classes, studying during Emma's naps and after her bedtime, determined to earn the credentials that would support my expanded role. Ryan encouraged my education, often taking evening client calls so I could attend classes without worrying about missing important business. Our personal relationship evolved gradually, built on shared late nights working on cases, quiet conversations during Emma's feeding times, and the comfortable rhythm of two people learning to depend on each other. Ryan never pushed for more than friendship, but his presence in our lives became increasingly essential. Emma responded to his voice with smiles and coos, reaching for him when he arrived at the office as if he were family. The moment I realized my feelings for Ryan had shifted from gratitude to something deeper came during a particularly difficult case involving a woman going through a contentious divorce. The client, Maria Santos, was fighting for custody of her children while her ex-husband used his financial advantages to make the legal process as painful as possible. Her situation reminded me painfully of my own recent experiences, and I found myself becoming emotionally invested in ways that weren't entirely professional. Ryan noticed my distress during a strategy meeting and suggested we continue the discussion over dinner. We left Emma with Claire, who'd become her devoted honorary aunt, and went to a small Italian restaurant where the lighting was soft and the conversations could be private. "You're taking Maria's case personally," Ryan observed gently, as we shared antipasto and wine. "I understand why, but we need to maintain some emotional distance to serve her effectively. Her ex-husband reminds me of David," I admitted, surprised by my own honesty. "The way he uses legal proceedings as punishment, the way he acts like she's nothing more than an obstacle to his happiness." Ryan reached across the table and took my hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "David was an idiot who never deserved you. Maria's ex-husband is an idiot who doesn't deserve her, but we're going to help her anyway, because that's what we do." The simple statement, delivered with quiet conviction while his hand held mine, crystallized everything I'd been feeling but hadn't acknowledged. Ryan wasn't just my business partner or Emma's honorary uncle. He was the man I'd fallen in love with, slowly and completely, while rebuilding my life from scratch. The realization might have been frightening if not for the way he looked at me, like someone seeing exactly what they'd been hoping to find. When he leaned across the table to kiss me, soft and sweet and tentative, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. "I've been wanting to do that for months," he confessed against my lips, his voice low and warm. "What took you so long?" I whispered back, feeling brave and happy in ways I'd forgotten were possible. Our romantic relationship developed with the same careful consideration that had characterized our business partnership. Ryan understood that Emma came first in my life, and he embraced that reality rather than competing with it. He learned her schedule, her preferences, her moods, becoming genuinely invested in her well-being rather than simply tolerating her presence. Emma, for her part, seemed to approve of the new arrangement. She smiled more readily when Ryan was around, fell asleep more easily in his arms, and began showing the signs of attachment that spoke to genuine bond formation. Watching them together, seeing Ryan's patience with her fussiness and delight in her milestones, I felt pieces of my heart healing that I hadn't realized were still broken. The business continued expanding as our personal relationship deepened. We handled more complex cases, developed a reputation for thorough preparation and genuine client advocacy, and began discussing the possibility of opening a second office. Ryan's vision of a practice that served both corporate clients and individuals navigating life transitions was becoming reality faster than either of us had anticipated. Our first major success came with Maria Santos's custody case. Through careful preparation and strategic negotiation, we secured primary custody for her, while protecting her financial interest from her ex-husband's vindictive tactics. The day the judge announced the decision, Maria burst into tears of relief and gratitude that reminded me why the work we were doing mattered beyond mere professional achievement. "You saved my children," she told us outside the courthouse, her voice thick with emotion. "You gave me back my life." That evening, Ryan and I celebrated with champagne and takeout Chinese food in my apartment, while Emma played contentedly on her blanket nearby. The success felt sweeter because we'd achieved it together, using our different strengths to serve someone who desperately needed advocate. We make a good team, Ryan said, raising his glass in a toast to our victory. We make a great team, I corrected, clinking my glass against his and meaning more than just our professional collaboration. By Emma's first birthday, our lives had settled into a rhythm that felt both stable and exciting. The law practice occupied a suite of offices in downtown Portland, complete with a small conference room where Emma could play during client meetings, and a kitchenette where Ryan made excellent coffee every morning. I'd completed my paralegal certification with honors, adding credentials that supported my expanding responsibilities within the practice. Ryan had moved into a larger apartment in the same building as mine, close enough for convenience, but separate enough to maintain our individual space. Emma toddled confidently between both apartments, equally comfortable with Ryan's modern furniture and my more eclectic decorating style. She called him Rai, and reached for him whenever he walked into a room, responses that filled me with joy and gratitude for the family we'd accidentally created. The question of marriage arose naturally during a quiet Sunday morning when Emma was napping and Ryan was making breakfast in my kitchen. He'd been staying over more frequently, and the domestic rhythm we'd developed felt permanent in ways that made formal commitment seem like a natural next step. "I love you," he said simply, setting down his coffee cup and taking my hands in his. "I love Emma. I love the life we're building together. I want to make it official." His proposal wasn't elaborate or theatrical, just honest and direct in the way that characterized everything about our relationship. He'd purchased a ring, a simple solitaire that caught the morning light beautifully, but his words mattered more than any jewelry. "I want to be Emma's father in every way that matters," he continued, his voice steady and certain. "I want to be your husband, your partner in everything. Will you marry me?" The answer had been obvious for months, but hearing him say the words still sent my heart racing with joy and anticipation. "Yes," I whispered, then louder. "Yes, absolutely, yeah." We married 3 months later in a small ceremony at the courthouse, with Claire as my matron of honor and Ryan's brother Michael as his best man. Emma toddled down the aisle in a yellow dress that made her look like a tiny sunbeam, carrying a basket of flower petals she scattered with serious concentration. The ceremony was brief and intimate, focused on the promises we were making to each other and to Emma about the family we were choosing to create. Our reception was dinner at the Vietnamese restaurant where we'd shared so many working lunches, the same place where Ryan had first told me about his vision for a law practice that prioritized people over profits. The owner, Miss Junian, had decorated our table with flowers and served champagne she'd been saving for special occasions. "To partnerships that make us stronger," Ryan toasted, his eyes meeting mine across the table while Emma banged her spoon enthusiastically against her high chair. The toast captured everything about our relationship that felt precious and worth protecting. We'd found each other during one of the most difficult periods of my life, but instead of merely surviving together, we'd built something that enhanced both our individual strengths and our shared dream. As we drove home that evening, Emma sleeping peacefully in her car seat while my wedding ring caught the streetlight through the windshield, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment. The woman who'd discovered her husband's betrayal while pregnant had evolved into someone confident, capable, and deeply loved. The man who'd offered me a design project when I desperately needed work had become my husband, my business partner, and Emma's devoted father. David's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been liberating in ways I was only beginning to understand. Without his abandonment, I might never have discovered my own strength, never met Ryan, never built the kind of partnership that elevated both people involved rather than diminishing one for the other's benefit. Emma stirred in her car seat, making the soft sounds that meant she was dreaming, and I felt a profound gratitude for the path that had led us here. We'd survived the worst and were now building towards something infinitely better. 5 years had transformed our modest law practice into Mitchell & Harper Legal Group, one of Portland's most respected firms specializing in family law and sustainable business practices. Our client roster included major corporations, small businesses transitioning to eco-friendly operations, and individuals navigating complex life changes. The success had been steady rather than meteoric, built on reputation and referrals rather than flashy marketing campaigns. Ryan's presentation was scheduled for the second day, giving us time to attend other sessions and network with potential contacts. I found myself genuinely engaged by the discussions, despite not yet being a licensed attorney, and several attendees expressed interest in our firm's approach to combining corporate and individual practice. Catherine Wells was everything her reputation suggested: brilliant, well-connected, and genuinely passionate about environmental law. She sought us out during the first day's lunch break, approaching our table with the confidence of someone accustomed to making strategic alliances. "Ryan Mitchell," she said, extending her hand with a smile that was both professional and warm. "I've been following your work through the Environmental Law Review. Your article on small business sustainability compliance was excellent." "Thank you," Ryan replied, standing to shake her hand. "This is my wife and business partner, Natalie Harper." Natalie, Catherine Wells. Catherine's handshake was firm, her attention focused and genuine as she assessed me with the quick evaluation of someone skilled at reading people. "I understand you're completing law school while managing partnership responsibilities. That's impressive." We talked for nearly an hour, discussing our practice philosophy, client approach, and long-term goal. Catherine was particularly interested in our model of serving both corporate and individual clients, something her firm had considered but never successfully implemented. "Most firms specialize in one direction or the other," she observed. "Corporate work pays better, but individual clients provide the satisfaction of directly helping people through difficult transitions. You've found a way to balance both. It's all about understanding that business decisions affect real people," I explained. "Whether we're helping a corporation develop sustainable practices or an individual navigate divorce proceedings, we're ultimately serving human needs." Catherine nodded thoughtfully. "That perspective is rare in legal practice. Most attorneys compartmentalize their work in ways that lose sight of the human element." The conversation continued through the afternoon sessions, with Catherine introducing us to other conference attendees and facilitating discussions about potential collaboration. By evening, it was clear that our Denver trip was exceeding our expectations in terms of professional networking and future opportunities. Ryan's presentation the following day was received enthusiastically, generating questions and discussions that extended well beyond the scheduled time slot. Several attorneys approached him afterward to discuss specific cases and potential referrals, while others expressed interest in collaborating on multi-state environmental projects. It was during the post-presentation networking session that Catherine made an unexpected proposal. "I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday," she began, drawing Ryan and me aside to a quieter corner of the reception area. "Wells & Associates has been looking for partners who share our commitment to environmental law but bring a different perspective on client service. What would you think about opening a Denver office?" The suggestion was both thrilling and overwhelming. Opening a second office would represent a major expansion of our practice, requiring significant investment and careful planning. But it would also provide access to a larger client base and the kind of professional growth opportunities that could transform our firm into a regional presence. "That's an intriguing possibility," Ryan replied diplomatically. "What would that look like practically?" Catherine had clearly given the matter considerable thought. "We could provide office space, administrative support, and client referrals while you establish your presence in the Denver market. In exchange, we'd collaborate on cases that require both corporate and individual representation, sharing resources and expertise. The arrangement would be mutually beneficial but complex, requiring careful negotiation and clear agreements about responsibilities and profit sharing." Catherine was proposing a partnership that could accelerate our growth significantly while providing her firm with capabilities they currently lacked. "We'd need time to consider all the implications," I said, my practical nature asserting itself despite the excitement of the opportunity. "This kind of expansion would affect every aspect of our practice." "Of course," Catherine agreed. "Take all the time you need, but I wanted to plant the seed while we're all here together and can discuss possibilities face to face." The remainder of the conference was a blur of meetings, presentations, and planning discussions. Emma seemed to sense our excitement, asking questions about Denver and whether we might spend more time there in the future. Her adaptability continued to amaze me. She approached new experiences with curiosity rather than anxiety, a resilience that had been tested and proven through our family's various transitions. The flight home gave Ryan and me time to process what had happened and begin preliminary discussions about Catherine's proposal. The opportunity was significant, but it would require careful consideration of timing, resources, and long-term goals. "What's your instinct?" Ryan asked as we watched Emma sleep in the seat between us, her small hand curled around the stuffed mountain goat she'd purchased at the Denver airport. "My instinct says it's the right opportunity with the right partner at the right time," I replied honestly. "But my practical side says we need to be very careful about how we structure any agreement." "Agreed, but if we can work out the details, this could be the expansion we've been talking about for the past year." The months following the Denver conference were devoted to due diligence, negotiations, and planning. Catherine proved to be as thoughtful and thorough in business discussions as she'd been during our initial conversation. The partnership agreement we eventually developed protected both firms' interests, while creating a framework for collaboration that could evolve as our working relationship deepened. The Denver office of Mitchell & Harper Legal Group opened 6 months later, occupying a suite within Wells & Associates' downtown building. I'd passed the Colorado bar exam, allowing me to practice law in both states, and we'd hired 2 associates to help manage the increased caseload. The expansion was ambitious but carefully planned, with clear metrics for measuring success and contingency plans for managing potential challenges. Our first major Denver case came through Catherine's referrals, a mid-sized construction company facing environmental compliance issues that threatened both their business operations and several individual employees' livelihood. The case required exactly the kind of combined corporate and individual representation that had attracted Catherine to our practice philosophy. The construction company was Harper Development, owned and operated by David Harper. The irony was so complete it felt like fiction. The man who'd abandoned me while I was pregnant with his child now needed legal help from the firm I'd built with my new husband. David's company was facing federal environmental violations related to improper waste disposal at several construction sites, violations that could result in both significant financial penalties and criminal charges for key personnel. Catherine had no knowledge of my personal history with David when she referred the case. The connection only became apparent when I reviewed the client files and saw David's name listed as the company's primary contact. For a moment, sitting in our Denver office while reviewing documents that contained my ex-husband's signature, I felt disoriented by the collision of past and present. Ryan noticed my reaction immediately. "What's wrong?" he asked, looking up from his own case file. "The Harper Development case," I said, sliding the folder across our shared desk. "Take a look at the client information." Ryan scanned the documents quickly, his expression shifting as he recognized the name and understood the implications. "David Harper," he said quietly. "Your ex-husband." "The same." We sat in silence for several minutes, processing the situation and its potential complications. Legally, there was no conflict of interest that would prevent us from representing David's company. Ethically, the situation was more complex, though not prohibitive. Personally, the prospect of helping the man who'd caused me so much pain felt surreal. "What do you want to do?" Ryan asked, finally. The question was both professional and personal. We could refer the case to another firm, avoiding any potential complications or emotional difficulty. Or we could handle it ourselves, treating David as any other client while maintaining professional boundaries. "I want to take the case," I heard myself say, surprising both Ryan and myself with the certainty in my voice. "This is exactly the kind of work we do, and we're the best firm for their needs." "Personal history doesn't change that." Ryan studied my face carefully. "Are you sure? This could be emotionally complicated." "I'm sure," I replied, feeling more confident as I spoke. David's company employs 47 people whose jobs depend on resolving these compliance issues. His personal failings don't negate their need for good legal representation. The decision felt right in ways I couldn't fully explain. Taking David's case wasn't about revenge or proving a point. It was about demonstrating that I'd become someone who could separate personal grievances from professional responsibility. The woman who'd been devastated by his betrayal had evolved into someone capable of helping him when he needed it most. Our first meeting with David was scheduled for the following week, giving me time to prepare emotionally for seeing him again after nearly 7 years. I'd heard through Portland's business community that his marriage to Vanessa had ended badly, resulting in a contentious divorce and the loss of several major contracts. His company had struggled financially, leading to the cost-cutting measures that had created their current environmental problems. The man who walked into our Denver conference room bore little resemblance to the confident, successful David I'd known. He looked older, worn down by stress and what appeared to be poor health. His expensive suits had been replaced by off-the-rack clothing that didn't quite fit properly, and his once perfect grooming showed signs of neglect. "Natalie," he said when he saw me, his voice carrying a mixture of surprise and discomfort. "I didn't realize you were practicing law now." "Mitchell and Harper Legal Group," I replied evenly, gesturing to the conference table where Ryan was arranging case material. "This is my husband and law partner, Ryan Mitchell." David's handshake with Ryan was brief and awkward, his eyes darting between us as he processed the implications of our professional success and personal happiness. The power dynamic that had once favored him so completely had shifted entirely, and his discomfort was palpable. "Let's discuss your company's situation," Ryan said diplomatically, directing the conversation toward business matters and away from personal history. The next 2 hours were devoted to reviewing Harper Development's environmental compliance issues, documenting the scope of their problems, and developing a strategy for resolving the federal violation. David answered our questions professionally but seemed diminished, lacking the confidence and charm that had once defined his personality. His company's problems were serious but solvable, requiring a combination of immediate corrective actions, compliance upgrades, and negotiated settlements with regulatory agencies. The work would be complex and expensive, but it offered a path forward that could save both the business and the jobs it provided. "We can help you," I concluded as our meeting wound down. "The process will take several months and require significant cooperation from your management team, but we can resolve these issues." David's relief was obvious, though he struggled to express gratitude to the woman he'd once dismissed as inadequate. "Thank you," he said finally. "I know this situation is awkward, but I appreciate your professionalism." "Awkward for whom?" I asked mildly. "You're a client with legal needs, and we're attorneys who can help. The situation is only complicated if we make it." The response was truthful and professional, but it also demonstrated how completely I'd moved beyond his ability to hurt me. The man who'd once held so much power over my happiness now commanded nothing more than my professional attention and basic human courtesy. After David left, Ryan and I debriefed the meeting and began planning our approach to his case. The legal work would be straightforward, but the personal dynamics required careful management to maintain appropriate boundaries. "How do you feel?" Ryan asked as we reviewed our notes. "Surprisingly normal," I replied honestly. "He looks like someone whose life hasn't gone according to plan, and I feel sorry for him in a general human way, but I don't feel angry, or vindictive, or even particularly interested in his personal circumstance." That's probably the healthiest possible response. It is. 7 years ago I thought David held the power to determine my worth and happiness. Seeing him today, I realize he never had that power. I just hadn't learned to recognize my own value yet. The Harper Development case proceeded smoothly over the following months, with David proving to be a cooperative if subdued client. Our legal strategy succeeded in reducing his company's penalties significantly, while establishing a compliance framework that would prevent future violations. The resolution saved Harper Development from bankruptcy and preserved the jobs of dozens of employees. Throughout the process, I maintained professional boundaries while treating David with the same courtesy I showed all our clients. There were no dramatic confrontations or emotional revelations, just competent legal work performed for someone who happened to share a complicated history with me. The case concluded successfully, with David's company resuming normal operations under new environmental protocol. At our final meeting, David thanked us formally for our work and made a surprising admission. "I want you to know," he said, addressing both Ryan and me, but looking primarily at me, "seeing what you've built here, the success you've achieved, it makes me realize I made a terrible mistake years ago. Not just morally, but practically. I gave up something valuable for something that turned out to be worthless." The statement felt like an apology without quite being one, an acknowledgement of poor judgment without full acceptance of responsibility. I appreciated the sentiment while recognizing its limitations. We all make choices based on what we think we want at the time, I replied diplomatically. The important thing is learning from those choices and moving forward constructively. After David left, Ryan and I returned to our regular caseload and ongoing business development effort. The Harper development case had been a professional success and a personal milestone, demonstrating that I'd truly moved beyond the pain of David's betrayal into a life defined by my own choices and achievement. That evening, as we flew back to Portland for a long weekend with Emma, I reflected on the strange circularity of the past months. The man who'd once held what felt like absolute power over my happiness had become nothing more than a client whose problems I'd solved professionally and promptly forgotten personally. The transformation felt complete. The pregnant woman, who'd slept in her car while her husband lived with his mistress, had become a successful attorney with the power to determine that same man's professional fate. But more importantly, she'd become someone who could wield that power with fairness and compassion rather than revenge. Emma met us at the Portland airport, full of stories about her weekend with Claire and excited to hear about our Denver adventure. As we drove home through the familiar streets of our adopted city, I felt grateful for the journey that had brought us to this point, and eager for whatever challenges and opportunities lay ahead. The phone call that would change everything came on a Tuesday morning in late spring, 3 years after we'd successfully resolved David's environmental compliance case. Emma, now 9 years old, was at school and Ryan was in court handling a complex corporate restructuring. The employees who depended on their jobs, the clients who'd trusted him with their projects, the subcontractors who were owed money. When a construction company collapsed under criminal charges, the ripple effects destroyed dozens of lives. What are the specific allegations? I asked, already reaching for a legal pad to take notes. Detective Rodriguez outlined a scheme that was both sophisticated and ultimately self-destructive. David had been inflating project costs, billing clients for work that was never completed, and using funds from new contracts to cover debts from previous projects. The environmental compliance issues we'd resolved 3 years earlier had apparently been just the tip of a much larger iceberg of financial misconduct. The district attorney's office will be filing formal charges within the week, she continued. Ms. Harper has requested legal representation, and our records show your firm handled his previous legal matters. I understand. We'll need to review the charges before determining if we can accept representation, given potential conflicts of interest. After ending the call, I sat in the quiet office trying to process the information. David's arrest wasn't entirely surprising given the financial pressures his company had been facing, but the scope of the alleged fraud was staggering. If the charges were accurate, he'd been operating a sophisticated Ponzi scheme that had defrauded clients of millions of dollars. Ryan returned from court to find me researching Colorado criminal defense procedures and reviewing our firm's conflict of interest policy. His expression shifted from curiosity to concern as I explained Detective Rodriguez's call and the charges David was facing. This is complicated, he said after reviewing my note. We represented his company on environmental issues, which means we have confidential information that could be relevant to these criminal charges. Exactly. We can't represent him without potentially compromising our previous work or violating attorney-client privilege from the environmental case. The ethical considerations were complex enough to require consultation with our professional liability insurance carrier and the State Bar Association. After several hours of research and consultation calls, we determined that representing David on criminal charges would create an unacceptable conflict of interest with our previous representation of his company. I called Detective Rodriguez to decline representation and provided David's contact information to several qualified criminal defense attorneys in the Denver area. It was a professional decision made for sound legal reasons, but it felt like closing the final chapter on a relationship that had shaped so much of my adult life. The news of David's arrest broke in the Portland business community within days, generating headlines about the construction executive whose environmental compliance troubles had apparently masked much deeper criminal activity. Several articles mentioned that Mitchell and Harper Legal Group had previously represented Harper Development, though none suggested any wrongdoing on our part. Claire called within hours of the first news reports, her voice excited in the way that suggested she'd been waiting years for David to face consequences for his actions. "Did you see the news about your ex-husband?" she asked without preamble. "Fraud, embezzlement, money laundering. They're saying he could face 20 years in federal prison." "I saw it," I replied calmly, though I appreciated her long-time loyalty and protective instincts. "How do you feel? Are you celebrating? Please tell me you're at least a little bit happy about this." The question forced me to examine my emotional response to David's downfall, and I was surprised by what I discovered. Instead of satisfaction or vindication, I felt a profound sadness for all the lives that would be damaged by his crime. His employees would lose their jobs, his clients would lose their investments, and his victims would struggle to recover financially. "I feel sorry for everyone he hurt," I said honestly. "His arrest doesn't undo the damage he caused to people who trusted him." Claire was quiet for a moment. "You're a better person than I am. If someone had treated me the way David treated you, I'd be dancing on their grave." "Dancing on graves doesn't help anyone heal," I replied. "David's consequences are appropriate for his actions, but they don't change anything about my life or Emma's life. We're already exactly where we need to be." The conversation with Claire crystallized something I'd been feeling but hadn't articulated. David's fate was genuinely irrelevant to my happiness or sense of justice. His arrest was simply news about someone I used to know, no more personally significant than reading about any other white-collar criminal in the newspaper. The trial proceedings unfolded over the following months, covered extensively by Denver media and occasionally mentioned in Portland business publications. David's defense attorney attempted to blame the financial irregularities on business pressures and poor bookkeeping rather than criminal intent, but the evidence was overwhelming. Federal investigators had documented a pattern of deliberate fraud spanning more than 5 years. Vanessa, his ex-wife, testified for the prosecution about David's lavish spending during their marriage and his boasts about creative financing that she now realized referred to illegal activity. Her testimony was devastating, painting a picture of someone who viewed fraud as a business strategy rather than a crime. The most damaging evidence came from David's own records, which documented his deliberate efforts to deceive clients and regulatory agents. Text messages, emails, and financial documents showed a systematic pattern of dishonesty that made claims of innocent mistakes impossible to sustain. Ryan followed the trial coverage professionally, since our previous representation of Harper Development meant we needed to understand how the criminal case might affect our completed environmental work. Fortunately, our compliance efforts had been legitimate and successful, with no connection to David's financial crimes. "The prosecution's case is overwhelming," Ryan observed after reviewing the latest news report. "His defense attorney is competent, but there's no credible defense for this level of documented fraud. What kind of sentence is he likely to face?" "With the federal charges and the amount of money involved, probably 15 to 20 years. He'll be in his 60s when he gets out, assuming he serves a full sentence." The prospect of David spending decades in prison felt surreal. The man who'd once seemed so powerful and successful would likely spend his remaining productive years in federal custody, emerging as an elderly ex-convict with no prospects for rebuilding his life. Emma, now old enough to understand basic concepts of crime and punishment, asked occasional questions about the news coverage she'd overheard. We'd always been honest with her about David being her biological father while emphasizing that Ryan was her real dad in every meaningful way. "Why did my birth father do bad things?" she asked one evening as I tucked her into bed. "Sometimes people make choices that seem easier in the short term but cause much bigger problems later," I explained. "He thought he could solve his business problems by taking money that didn't belong to him, but that just made everything worse." "Is he going to jail for a long time?" "Probably, yeah. When people break important laws, especially laws about taking other people's money, the consequences are very serious." Emma considered this information with the thoughtful expression she'd inherited from both her biological parents. "I'm glad you and Dad are honest people," she said finally. "It's better to have problems you can fix than problems you can't fix." Her wisdom, delivered with 9-year-old directness, captured something essential about the choices that had defined both David's path and mine. When faced with difficulties, I'd chosen honesty, hard work and gradual progress over shortcuts and deception. The approach had been harder initially but had led to sustainable success and genuine happiness. The jury reached its verdict after 3 days of deliberation. Guilty on all counts. David was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years. The judge's comments during sentencing emphasized the scope of his crimes and their impact on innocent victims. The defendant's actions destroyed the financial security of dozens of families, Judge Patricia Chen stated before announcing the sentence. His betrayal of trust was systematic, calculated, and devastating to those who believed in his integrity. The news of David's conviction and sentencing felt like the conclusion of a story that had begun with my discovery of his infidelity nearly a decade earlier. The man who'd abandoned his pregnant wife for another woman had ultimately destroyed everything he'd tried to build, losing his freedom, his wealth and his reputation through his own criminal choices. That evening, Ryan, Emma and I had dinner at our favorite family restaurant, the same Vietnamese place where Ryan and I had celebrated our business milestones and personal anniversaries. Mrs. Wiegand, who'd become something of a surrogate grandmother to Emma, noticed our subdued mood and asked if everything was all right. Just processing some news about people from our past, I explained. Nothing that affects our present, but still significant. The past is useful for learning, Mrs. Wiegand replied with the philosophical directness I'd come to appreciate. But living there is wasting the present. You have good present, good future. Focus on those. Her advice was simple but profound. David's conviction was the final resolution of a chapter in my life that had already been closed emotionally and practically. His crimes and punishment were consequences of his own choices, unrelated to the life I'd built with Ryan and Emma. Later that night, after Emma was asleep, Ryan and I sat on our back porch discussing the day's events and their broader implications for our family and practice. Do you feel like justice was served? He asked, genuinely curious about my emotional response to David's sentencing. I feel like David received the consequences his actions earned, I replied carefully. Whether that constitutes justice depends on your perspective. The victims got some closure, society was protected from further crimes, and David learned that illegal behavior has serious costs. But did it give you personal satisfaction? The question required honest self-examination. Did David's downfall provide some sense of cosmic balance for the pain he'd caused me years earlier? Did his imprisonment feel like vindication for the nights I'd spent sleeping in my car while pregnant with his child? No, I said finally. His punishment doesn't change anything about what happened between us or how I felt then. My healing came from building this life with you and Emma, not from his suffering. That's remarkably mature of you. It's remarkably practical of me, I corrected with a smile. Tying my happiness to David's fate would give him power over my life that he doesn't deserve and never really had. My satisfaction comes from our success, our family, our work that helps people. None of that has anything to do with David. The conversation continued into the evening, touching on themes of justice, forgiveness, and the different paths people choose when facing adversity. David had responded to business pressures with criminal behavior that ultimately destroyed everything he'd tried to preserve. I'd responded to personal betrayal with hard work and legal strategies that had created something better than what I'd lost. 6 months after David's sentencing, our law firm received an unexpected call from his attorney. David wanted to write a letter apologizing for his past treatment of me and asking if I would be willing to receive it. The request was unusual but not unprecedented. Many prisoners attempt to make amends as part of their personal rehabilitation process. I agreed to receive the letter, curious about what David might say after years of reflection and the reality of his circumstance. The letter arrived 2 weeks later, handwritten and on prison stationery in the careful script of someone with abundant time to choose each word precisely. The letter was 3 pages long, beginning with acknowledgement of his crimes and their impact on innocent victims before transitioning to personal reflections on his treatment of me during our marriage and its aftermath. He wrote about watching news coverage of our firm's success and realizing that his abandonment of our family had been based on fundamental misunderstandings of strength, ambition, and worth. I convinced myself that you lacked the drive and capability to build something significant, he wrote in one particularly poignant passage. Seeing what you've accomplished, the family you've created, the lives you've improved through your legal work. I understand that I was the one who lacked the character to build anything lasting or meaningful. The letter concluded with an apology that felt genuine in its specificity and acceptance of responsibility, along with gratitude for the professional representation our firm had provided during his environmental compliance issue. He asked for nothing in return, expressing only hope that Emma would grow up knowing she was wanted and loved by the family that had chosen to raise her. Reading the letter stirred unexpected emotions, not of forgiveness or reconciliation but of closure. The David who'd written those words seemed to understand, finally, the magnitude of what he'd destroyed through his own choices. His acknowledgement couldn't change the past, but it provided a kind of completion to a relationship that had shaped so much of my adult development. I showed the letter to Ryan, who read it carefully before offering his characteristically thoughtful response. "It takes courage to write something like this," he observed, apologizing without asking for anything in return, acknowledging mistakes without making excuses. "I'm glad he sent it. Should I write back? Do you want to?" The question required consideration. Responding to David's letter would open a line of communication that could become complicated or emotionally draining. Not responding might seem harsh, but it would maintain the boundaries that had allowed me to move forward completely. "No," I decided after thinking it through. The letter accomplished what it needed to accomplish. He got to apologize, I got to receive his acknowledgement, and that's enough closure for both of us. I filed the letter in our family documents, a historical artifact that Emma might someday want to read when she was old enough to understand the complexities of adult relationships and the importance of accepting responsibility for one's actions. The months following David's letter brought continued growth for our law firm and our family. Emma excelled in school and developed a passion for environmental science that seemed to blend both her biological parents' interests in construction and design with Ryan's commitment to sustainable practices. Our Denver office had become profitable enough to justify hiring additional staff, and we were considering expansion into other Western states. Most importantly, our personal happiness had deepened rather than simply stabilized. The challenges we'd faced together had strengthened our partnership rather than straining it, and our shared commitment to building something meaningful had created a foundation that felt genuinely unshakable. On the 10th anniversary of my divorce from David, Ryan and I renewed our wedding vows in a small ceremony attended by Emma, Claire, and a few close friends from our legal practice. The celebration wasn't about replacing old memories with new ones, but about acknowledging how far we'd traveled together and committing to the journey that lay ahead. Emma served as our ring bearer, carrying simple bands we'd designed together to replace the more elaborate rings from our original courthouse wedding. Her pride in participating was obvious, and her short speech about what family meant to her brought tears to everyone present. "A real family is people who choose to take care of each other every day," she declared with 9-year-old wisdom. "Dad chose Mom, Mom chose Dad, and they both chose me. That's how love works." Her words captured everything essential about the life we built together. Love wasn't something that happened to us, but something we chose to create and maintain through daily actions and long-term commitment. The family we'd become was intentional rather than accidental, stronger because it was chosen rather than assumed. As we drove home that evening, Emma asleep in the back seat after an exciting day, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment of celebration and commitment. The pregnant woman who'd slept in her car while her husband lived with his mistress had evolved into someone who understood that true strength came from building rather than destroying, from choosing hope over bitterness, from creating something new rather than mourning what was lost. David's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been liberating in ways I was still discovering. Without his abandonment, I might never have learned to depend on my own capabilities, never met Ryan, never built a career that utilized all my talents, never discovered the kind of partnership that enhanced both people rather than diminishing one for the other's benefit. The phone call that had begun this final chapter, informing me of David's arrest and eventual imprisonment, had provided the last piece of evidence that I'd chosen the right path forward from our shared disaster. While he'd continued making choices that led to destruction and consequences, I'd built something sustainable and meaningful that continued growing stronger each year. Emma stirred in her car seat as we pulled into our driveway, opening sleepy eyes to smile at Ryan and me before settling back into peaceful rest. Looking at her, I felt profound gratitude for the circuitous path that had led to this family, this home, this life that exceeded anything I could have imagined when I was young and thought I knew what happiness looked like. The woman who'd once measured her worth by someone else's approval had learned to value herself based on her own choices and their impact on the people she loved. The scared girl who'd felt powerless in the face of betrayal had become someone with genuine power, used responsibly to help others and protect what mattered most. David's story had ended with consequences earned through criminal choice. My story was still being written, chapter by chapter, choice by choice, with the people who'd chosen to write it alongside me. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.